what we're here for today is to look at Dynamics 365 and the customization opportunities we have with the PowerApps platform. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to kind of start with a very general Power Platform architecture discussion and basically talk about how we have environments, we have the common data service, we have these two different services for creating Canvas apps and creating flows, and how they all fit together. And then there's three specific things we're going to look at building Canvas apps, writing flows, and then also building model-driven apps. At the very end, we're going to take a look at some of the business process flows that are part of the architecture, and we'll look at business process flows that come out of the box with Dynamics 365 if you get Dynamics 365 for sales. Okay, now what is the Power Platform? It's within one of the data groups in Microsoft, and they've decided to create this new world, and one of the things that they're really aimed at is the citizen developer. So there's a part about building solutions where if you read true developers, typically things are going to get pretty complicated and take a lot longer. And if we had a platform, it's not that developers can't use it, it's just that we want to have more and more tasks that don't require developer level knowledge. So that was the spirit with which the Power Platform was created. Now, we're going to be looking at PowerApps and Flow today. PowerApps and Flow have a lot in common in the fact that they both live within environments. They're both part of the Power Platform. Power BI is a little bit out on its own, being that it is based on workspaces and capacities. Now, once again, we're going to concentrate on PowerApps and Flow. And you have this built-in database now in the PowerApps platform, which is called the Common Data Service. And what we're going to see is that there's a special type of Power App application called a model-driven app that specifically looks at the Common Data Service. We also have Canvas apps and flows, and while they can talk to the Common Data Service, they can go through connectors and basically talk to just about any type of external data source, SharePoint site, SQL Server, Salesforce. And also we have gateways so that if you're creating a Canvas app or a flow and we want to be able to access data in an on-premise environment, such as a SQL database or a SharePoint on-premises farm, we can basically go through a gateway, to be able to build solutions, based on data that lives just about anywhere. Now, what is the Common Data Service? So the Common Data Service, you can think of it as a standardized database, but it's far more than that. So it's a standard database that Microsoft has built for a general solution development based on things like CRMs, ERP systems, and it provides a common database infrastructure. So we have this standard database schema. So we already have a way to collect information about companies, accounts, about people, contacts, about things that are scheduled, activities. So we have a database, think of it as just kind of standardized tables, and it also gives me a way to create new entities and extend existing entities. It gives me the ability not just to kind of create these entities and have a table in a database, but also to associate user interface components with them, such as forms for modifying data and views for, looking at data, searching through data. And also we're going to have entity-specific business logic, such as what we're going to see with the business process flow. When we get to model-driven apps, you're going to see there's a really neat way to basically just take a set of entities and have them use their own UI, and it gets to be very easy to stand up an application. Okay, now a little bit of background. Everything that we're going to do is going to basically be created within the context of an environment. So in the PowerApps platform, you have environments, and that's where the content lives for the Common Data Service database. And an environment either has one CDS database or it has zero. So for people who are doing office work, we've been able to give them Canvas apps and flows, and they have environments that have no CDS. But more and more, you're seeing that the CDS is basically being, added to more and more environments. So for instance, if I'm just using Office, but I want to use the approvals in Microsoft Flow, that has to build the CDS database, into the underlying environment. So we're probably moving towards a world where every environment will have a CDS database. I can't say that for sure, but that's kind of what it seems like to me. And then for this crowd, what's important, is as of version 9, Dynamics 365, is running inside of a CDS instance. So Microsoft's eating its own dog food when it comes to the Common Data Service, and everything that you can do to extend the Common Data Service, you can do to extend Dynamics 365. Now, there's a couple different places that we can go to start looking at things. So let's go ahead and kind of start up with a couple demos. If I go to the PowerApps Maker portal, make.powerapps.com, and then I go down and I go to the Admin Center, what you're going to see here is that you can see the environments. Now, there are some changes about with admin centers, but let's say that I go here and I say, create a new environment. So, this is going to be my test, D365 ENV. And so what we'll do is we'll create a trial. And note that my plan doesn't support creating, I think I might have created too many already. Let's see. No, it's going to let me create a side here. And as I create the environment, you can see that it's making me initialize parameters because it's going to be creating a new Common Data Service database. Now, there's another admin, let me go back over here, which Microsoft is creating, which is basically the Power Platform Admin Center. So note that I can see environments from here. Up until recently, the new button did not work, but just this week, now the new button, will also let you, create a new environment with or without a database. Okay, and then also note that, let's go back here and kind of take a look at the environment that I have just created, and note that if I open this up, if I can see org and then I see a number inside there, I know it's got a content database. But if I open this up, there's the Dynamics 365 Admin Center. So there are still some tasks that you have to go back and do here. And one of the things that I might want to do is I might want to get Dynamics 365 sales, installed. So by, going through here and basically, there's the sales application. It should already be installed. Okay, so we're able not just to create blank CDS databases, which is the core, but if you want to also inject the Dynamics 365 entities inside there, you can. Okay, now just kind of a high-level overview of where we've come from. Way back in the late 90s and just after the change of millennium, Microsoft was acquiring a certain number of software companies that had financial packages. And one of the first things they did was they kind of moved to put the Dynamics brand on all these. And then more recently, what we've seen is that Microsoft's trying to move, everything that's on-premise to the cloud. Certainly, they're getting a lot of resistance from some companies and some customers, and old fogies like me in certain cases. But still, you can see that if Microsoft has software they've acquired from all these different companies, you can imagine that the databases from Navision and Great Plains and Solomon, 3 different databases, they all tracked information about companies that they needed to invoice and humans that have phone numbers and email addresses, but the database schemas were all just a little bit different. So being able to kind of generalize and have one schema that works across, any type of financial application or any type of sales application or any type of human resource application, is the obvious goal. So the Common Data Service, we can think of as a platform. And what we know is that Microsoft has a certain amount of Dynamics 365 activity going on in their customer base, so they will be living on top of the Common Data Service. What I'd really like to, know the answer to, if I had a crystal ball, would be how well will Microsoft do getting companies to build on top of the Common Data Service that aren't using Dynamics 365? And Microsoft recently announced a bunch of changes to the licensing. And at a high level, what I feel is that the licensing changes are great for Dynamics 365 and independent software vendors, and a little bit harmful to people using Office 365 customization, in maybe larger organizations, but now they have something called a per app model. We're using a lot of the things that we're going to look at today. A model-driven app, in the old licensing model required $40 per user, and lots of companies that weren't using Dynamics 365 just thought that was too expensive. But now with the per app plan at $10 a month, you can basically use anything that you want, put together something pretty extravagant, and the price is, basically gone down for a certain category of user, from $40 a month to $10 a month. So that could drive more development on top of the common data service, even in cases when Dynamics 365 is not involved. Now, let's go back here. And what I wanted to do is I've got a couple different environments. So for instance, if I go and take a look at this environment right here, and now I go down to entities, I see a certain set of entities that come out of the box. Note that Microsoft also, when they do things like extend PowerApps with their new portal infrastructure, and now that they're adding a whole bunch of artificial intelligence features, a lot of that is being implemented by them adding entities into the CDS. So what I can see here is that, if I look at different standard entities and custom entities, here's all their stuff for AI. But if I look at master, here are kind of the main entities that you have in Dynamics 365, the account, the contact. Now, note that if I go ahead and now kind of move over to this other environment, and here we have Dynamics 365 installed. Okay, now let's go ahead and kind of group and list all inside here. And you see that, there's a lot more, because by adding in Dynamics 365, a lot of what we're doing is just increasing the number of entities that come out of the box. So for instance, if you're just working on the common data service alone, you'll have account, contact, activity, task. These are kind of considered, anytime you work on the common data service, you have these entities. However, when you install Dynamics 365 for sales, all of a sudden you get all these extra entities: territory, lead, opportunity, quote, invoice, order. Let's go back here and just to kind of go into what many people kind of use as the main Dynamics 365 application. Notice that you have accounts, we have contacts back here, and there's just basically entities, behind each of these. Okay, now going a little bit further here, what can you build with PowerApps that we can use in the Dynamics 365 environment? So we can build Canvas apps. We can create connections for Canvas apps and flows so that they can reach out and get data from somewhere else and bring it back and basically, add it into Dynamics 365, or, the opposite, export instead of import. We also can extend the common data service by customizing existing entities or adding custom entities, and we can build model-driven apps. Okay, so enough talk. I'm going to go through a couple more slides pretty quickly, but I'd like to spend most of the hour kind of doing demos. Now, if you've never built Canvas apps, we basically, with a Canvas app, can go to the Maker portal, and when we start building apps, I can connect to data. So to build a very simple app, let's say that we go back here, make sure we're in the right environment, and let's go ahead and create an app. And I want to create a Canvas app. And as I create this Canvas app, I can basically say, please hook me into the common data service. Note that when you create one of these apps from an app template, they only support the phone layout. But now if I say create this app, it's going to give me a very long list of notice that they give you kind of the common ones up above, and then they go alphabetically after that. But let's say we want to create something simple for leads. So we'll go ahead, and I want to create a little bit of a mobile app for my sales force that are going out meeting people. They want to quickly put leads into the mobile device and upload them. So I can create this particular app, And note that, as I build this, it automatically has 3 screens. If I look at the first screen here, the Browse Gallery, we can begin to customize that. As a for instance, if I now go inside here just to kind of show some quick customizations. So here is, this item.name, and then there's this item.topic. Do we really want topic, or maybe we want the, user email that we can see inside there? We also have a edit screen. Let me kind of drill out a little bit here. And what's neat about working with Canvas apps is this idea of data-driven forms. So here's this form. I can kind of see the name, but note that if I come back up here and I kind of look at the fields behind the form, there's name. I can add extra fields if I'd like to. So if I come back here and, we look for first, well, maybe instead of putting a name, my people want to put in first name and last name separately. Okay, so I can go ahead, add these fields. Note that I can kind of drag and drop things around, such as this. Let's go ahead and create last name. And now that we've done that, maybe these other things, we really don't care about. So let's remove that. Let's remove that. Let's go ahead and remove that. Oh, and I forgot email. So let's go ahead and find the email address, and add that inside here as well. Okay, so now with this app, this is something that I could publish. I could now share it with other people, and if they had the PowerApps mobile device installed, they'd be able to begin using this on their iPhone. Okay, so let's go ahead and add in somehow I lost my page there. Okay, here we go. But let's go ahead and, add something in. Ted Pattison, company name CPT. What is the topic? Hot lead, and x@y.com. Okay, so you can kind of see that, it's fairly easy to work with these. And, now that we've got that inside there, if I go back and we just go back to the out-of-the-box Dynamics 365 application, we start looking at leads, now your Canvas app can basically start, reading and writing things, right into your entities. Okay, now a little bit more about Canvas apps. When you work with Canvas apps, you either choose tablet, which is really tablet or desktop full browser width, or mobile. Okay, we're starting to make strides in Canvas apps where you can create a truly responsive app that will basically adjust to a mobile device. But in the past, we've done a lot of work where we create one that targets the mobile device, and if you use it in the browser, it's fairly small, and then some companies create 2. Okay. When we get to the model-driven apps, you're going to see that that problem is taken care of. It just kind of works on mobile devices. Now, when you build Canvas apps, you build multiple screens, and I built one from a little template inside there. What's also possible is, let's say I go back, and now I decide I want to create a new Canvas app. And as you get good at Canvas apps, you do not want to rely on those wizards to build your starting point. So let's say that I go back here to tablet layout, and inside of a tablet layout, now I want to go ahead and create a connection and see basically those leads inside there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a gallery. Once I insert a gallery, I can create a connection. Note that the PowerApps environment, is getting more tuned in to Dynamics 365. Okay, so there's the one I want to build it on, leads. And after it switches to leads, once again, I can kind of switch this over to, let's say, title and subtitle. Same thing as I can come in here and switch that to email. Okay. And then, let's say that I want to add something new. So let's go over here to forms, and now I'm going to add an edit form. Now, I've already got a connection. So I don't need to create a new connection because both that gallery showing leads and this form, which is going to create a lead, are going to come from the same connection. So let's go ahead and pick leads. And now I get to edit, what fields are going to be in there. And let's go ahead and remove. And this is kind of going to be the similar exercise to what I did before. But now let's go ahead and add first name and last name. And then after I do that, we'll go through the steps to configure the form to actually write things back into Dynamics 365. Okay, so now I have my fields. Now I'm just going to drag these around to make sure that they're in the right place. Okay, and I might go over here and say, let's just work at one column at a time. Hey, is this the most annoying thing that I've ever seen? I think it is. Okay, how about remind me later? Okay, let's come back here, and I'm going to switch that to 1. Okay, so now here's what we have. Now, if I just start this up, what you'll notice is that the form doesn't go into new mode. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 2 buttons. Here's the button that's going to go into new mode, and then here's the button that's going to do the update. Now, when you create Power Apps, you should use better naming conventions. When you're doing really quick demos, you don't have time. But here's Form 1. So when someone clicks this button, what we're going to do is we're going to call something which is called New Form and point to Form 1. Okay, and then the second button, which is going to be the update, is going to be the Submit Form. And if I call Submit Form inside here and call Form 1, basically that's all I'm going to have to do. Let's go ahead and try this. So I'll open this up. We click the button, and that initializes the form. So now we'll put in our buddy Chuck Sterling. And now what company is he from? He's from that Microsoft company. What is the topic? We'll just talk about Chuck. That's what he likes to do. I'll go ahead and click OK. And now it gets saved. It's saved back. And just to prove that, if we come back here and I kind of do a quick refresh, you can see that my Canvas app is just saving things back into the Common Data Service. So that works out, pretty smoothly. Okay. So what I wanted to kind of show is, just kind of getting started with Canvas apps. Now, model-driven apps are neat. Lots of people use Canvas apps and they see model-driven apps and they say, we want to go there. But you have to give Canvas apps their due because they give you just a very flexible way to achieve the user interface experience that you want. They're great for mobile devices if you need to do things like have barcode scanners, you want mobile devices, you want pictures automatically uploaded. So they definitely add a neat element. And also remember that Canvas apps can connect to any type of data, where model-driven apps pretty much, connect to the Common Data Service. Now, if you get good at Canvas apps, you have to get up to speed on a formula language. I didn't do much with the formulas, but as we start doing things like building galleries and putting filtering in place, just as a simple example here, here's an example of adding the filtering. So when someone clicks on my filter button, it applies the filter to what they're seeing in the UI. Okay. Now both Canvas apps and flows can get to external data, and so they're based on a connector infrastructure. Microsoft often touts that now they have 250 different connectors. So they've worked with a lot of different companies that have services so that your Canvas apps and flows can connect to so many different types of data sources. Okay, just as a proof to that, if I go down to connections and I say create a new connection for me, you can kind of see that there's just amazing amounts. It takes you a while just to get through the A's. I guess maybe that's because of Azure. But all of these, different choices, are different connectors that you can use. And you use a connector to create a connection. And the connection is the thing that basically is configured with the path to the database, or the URL to the web service, and typically some type of credentials. Okay. And I gave you kind of some simple examples of also, doing the data binding, using galleries and forms. And I took a little bit of a look at working with the data cards behind forms, but there's a whole world there that you can dive into and really get good at building these. Okay, now, of course, we're time constrained, so we want to move ahead. We don't want to cut out the things at the end because that's going to be the best stuff. So let's go ahead and move into working with flows. Now, what is flow? It's a service for us to, automate tasks, by writing this set of instructions that can execute, by us clicking a button or by us configuring a SharePoint list or an entity set in Dynamics 365 to trigger the flow whenever a new record is added. And so the things that we do with flow is we send emails, send notifications, copy files, import data, export data. You can automate approvals. Now, when we use flow, there always has to be a trigger. I'm going to do a demo with a pretty simple trigger. It will just be clicking a button. But then once the trigger starts the flow, we just start adding actions, into a designer. Now, there's different services that we're going to want to read and write from. And the idea is that our connectors, are what allow us to, pull data back from certain places and write data into other places. Okay, so now that we've seen that, let's keep going through. And if I create a flow, let's go back here, and I'm going to now move over to Microsoft Flow. And let's say that I want to create a new flow. And if I go and just say flow from blank and skip, and now I get to a brand new flow. So if I kind of call this one, my first flow. And one thing that really confuses people, you can see that I was so confused I went to a different screen, is that this up top here is the name of the flow you're creating. So let's call that one something like, my first flow. And then what do I want for the trigger? So let's say that I had Dynamics 365. And so, you're going to see that there are Dynamics 365 triggers. So if you want to, trigger a flow when a data source is refreshed, note that there are also common data service triggers, that are more generic. And these can be used, as well. So when a record is created, I want my flow to execute every time we add a new account. Okay, now for this one, I'm just going to add in a button. And so just to make my demo simple, we're going to have something that I click a button and it will start the flow. But note that you can take triggers and break them down into three areas. There is the scheduled flow, so you can use the recurrence trigger and have a flow that runs once a day, once an hour, once a minute. You can have flows that run in response to something happening. SharePoint item is created. Dynamics 365 record is created. You can also create a flow that gets triggered by an incoming HTTP request. That can be pretty useful. And then there's the simple on-demand triggers. So I'm going to use the flow trigger. And also note that if you have a Canvas app, flows are much more capable at Canvas apps when it comes to reading and writing and dealing with error and contingencies from errors. So if you create a Canvas app, you can create a flow button or what's called a PowerApps trigger that allows the Canvas app to have a button that we click on, and then you could create a parameter list that the Canvas app passes to the flow. Okay, now in our case right here, we're going to create a simple one. Now, if we were going to spend more time with flow, there are these basic actions that are just built into flow that are kind of the, the basic grammar of writing flows. So there's control of flow, there's condition, if then, apply to each is your for each loop. You're able to create variables. So quite often I need to create, some type of a value. Sometimes I want to hold a GUID. Another time I might want to determine whether a record exists and have a true or false variable. So I can create variables. And then there's also data operations. Something like select, would allow me to take an array that has 10 columns and kind of change the columns by adding some together and giving them new names. Okay, now the other thing to note about flow is that you'll have steps. So the trigger is step one. And the trigger has outputs. And when you're in a step, the outputs of earlier steps are available to you. So let's say we have another thing that's going to create a file. So input, you have to give it the file name, and the output, could be other details about that. But basically, as you create flows, there's ways to kind of take information from, what's come earlier. Now, let's go back to my flow. And one of the things that I want to do with this demo is, let's go through the process of calling out to a web service, getting some data. I'm going to get a customer, and basically writing it back. So we'll come back here, and if I look at this URL, subliminalsystems.com/API/customers, it's just a little web service that we use in some of our training classes. And also, if I take this URL and I basically add a integer ID inside there, it gets one particular customer. Okay, so now you've seen that. Let's say that inside of my flow, I want to go ahead and call out to this web service. Okay, now if I can get back to the flow that I just created, okay, it looks like I need to create one more flow. Jumping around too fast, this is going to be, get new lead. And that will be a flow button. And now we'll add a new step, and this is going to be HTTP, and there is an HTTP action. I can call across the network. Now here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a formula. So here I have a flow formula that's going to go out there, and I'm just going to take a random number between 1 and 300, and the idea is that if I keep changing this number, basically it'll give me a random customer back. Okay, so if I go back here, I'll set this to a get method. For the URL, I'm going to go to the expression. We're going to go ahead and add that in. And before I do anything else, let's go ahead and run this. So if I go ahead and I run this right here, I should be able to kind of verify that we actually made an HTTP request and that it came back successfully. If it fails, I can see that and begin to troubleshoot it. But what you can see here is, here was the input. Here's the output down here. I'm going to grab that body because we're going to use it in the next step. Okay, so now that we've made that HTTP request, let's go back into edit mode, and I've got this big hunk of data coming back in what's called JavaScript Object Notation, or JSON. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, I'd like to parse this JSON. If I come down here, notice that the output of this HTTP action is available. I'm going to add that in. Now, I have to give it an XML schema. However, there's the trick where, let's go ahead and open up Notepad. Here's what I just kind of copied from the browser. So what are the elements here that I care about? Well, I really don't care about this OData element. I come down here, let's say that we care about up to here, and this other stuff's not important. So I'm going to kind of take this payload. We're going to go back over here, and we're going to paste that in. And so now I've kind of gotten some shape around the data. Okay, I forgot to trim off that comma there at the end. But now that I've parsed that, well, let's go ahead and do something. So let's go to Dynamics 365, and let's see if Ted can spell Dynamics 365. No, not yet. Okay, so finally we'll see Dynamics 365, and we'll pick that, and let's pick this create a new record. So I want to create a new record. What's it going to be? It's going to be, first of all, I have to pick the environment, because that's not an obvious thing. Next, we pick what is the entity that I want to write to. So let's kind of keep working with leads. Now, when I pick leads, after a second, it comes down and kind of shows me, hey, look at what you can add in. And so up above and parse JSON is where we parsed all that data. I should now be able to go to my lead and say, there's the last name, new lead from X YZ. If I want, some places I can, hard code in information, but now let's put this up a little bit higher, add the company name, add the email address. Now we'll add the first name of this particular lead. Let's go ahead and hit save. Okay, now that we've done that, let's go ahead and test it out. So we'll go ahead and run our test. And as we run this test right here and run our flow, okay, your flow ran successfully. Okay. Now, actually what this says is your flow run successfully started. I always like to joke, successfully started doesn't mean that much. The last day of the Titanic's maiden voyage started successfully. General Custer's last day at Little Bighorn started successfully. It's whether it finishes okay is really, what you want. So if I come down here, I can kind of see that, we went all the way. We've created this new record. If we go back, into the other tool right here, and we go ahead and refresh our leads, we can basically see that, now we have a new lead inside there. If I go back here and we go to our flows right here, and I just kind of want to execute this a couple more times, just because it gives me satisfaction to know my flow is kind of pulling in data. You can kind of see that this, it just gets to be a great way to import, data, into your environment. Okay. Now, I pre-wrote something to kind of show you how far you could take this. So let's look at something a little bit more complicated. So there's always this problem of, I have a contact, I want to add it, but do we already have an account that we created for another contact from the same company? So here's an example where it kind of goes down, does the same type of thing, and then we're going to create this variable called account ID. Now, we're going to use account lookup. And the idea is when I say account lookup, I can say, let's look into accounts and see if we already have an account that has this name. And so once this comes back, now I can create something that looks like this. And I guess this is a little trickier than it needs to be. But there's a way for you to basically say, when we ran that and we got back this array called value, did it have anything in it? Yes or no? So basically this is just kind of setting a Boolean value. If the account does not exist, well, we'll go ahead and create that new account. And then what's also really important here is that after creating the account, we basically are able to get that account ID inside there. So here is where we create the account, but when this finishes, what is very important is that, from that particular create account record, I can get the unique identifier. Okay, so now we have something where, let's go down here, we'll hit save. Let's go ahead and run this. And as we run this particular flow this time, it goes ahead, it runs, and after it runs, what we should be able to do is go down here and basically see, which way did it go? Okay, the account wasn't created. It had to, create a new account for Tyrell Corporation. After it created that new account for Tyrell Corporation, it was able to add in last name Atkins inside. Okay, now if I go back here and we go back to contacts, and now we basically see if I can find that one inside. Okay, what was it? Adkins inside here. So if we go back and we do a search and we find Atkins, hey, there's our buddy Murray Atkins. If I drill inside here and we kind of go and, so basically we've kind of created the account and the contact, in a single run of our flow. And had that not been the case, going back here, we basically have something saying if the account, has been created, let's go ahead and set that account ID. So in either case, whether we're creating it or whether we just find an existing record, we set the account ID variable. So down below here is where, we can add the account ID to associate the new contact, with an existing account. Okay. So once again, just wanted to kind of show you some of the neat things that you could do working with Flow and Dynamics 365 together. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is take a look at model-driven apps. So model-driven apps is just a whole new world for people that have been creating Canvas apps. When you create Canvas apps, there's a lot of work because you have to kind of build out every single screen. So that kind of takes, a pretty good amount of effort, in order to be able to do that. Now, let's go ahead and move, into our Canvas-driven apps. So the idea of a Canvas-driven app is that you're not going to have to lay things out. In fact, less slides, more action here. So let's go back. And if I can finally get back to Dynamics 365 and created our Canvas apps. And so now, and let's make sure I'm in the right place. Now, if I go to apps and we basically say, I would like to create a model-driven app. Okay, so let's create a model-driven app. And I'll just kind of call this, Ted's, sales app. And so I'll go ahead and say done. And so really my philosophy should be I'm not building out screens. I'm assembling a bunch of entities, to form a user interface experience. And the way you point to entities is by changing the sitemap. So if I go to the sitemap, notice that there's something called area. And I'm just going to go ahead and kind of change these to some simple names here so you can kind of see where they show up. One we're going to say, Ted's area, and then for group, this is going to be Ted's group, and you're going to see these kind of in the UI. But now when it comes to sub area, that's a navigation node. And over here, one of the things that I could do is I could say, I would like that to point to an entity. In which entity would you like to point to? So let's point to a couple different ones. So let's point to lead. And now we'll go down here and I'll say add. I'll add another sub area. And once again, we'll basically pick entity. And this time we'll pick account. And then we'll add one more in here. And this one, once again, will be an entity. And this one is going to be the contact. So if I come down here and we pick contact, we're all ready to go. Now, if you haven't used Dynamics 365 or model-driven apps, things have to be published. So I'm going to click on Save, and note that the sitemap has to be published, and then the app that's using the sitemap has to be independently published. So now we'll go ahead and choose Save. We'll go ahead and choose Publish, and now we can basically run the app. So what we're going to get here is something where up top here, you kind of see that there is a single area. When there's multiple areas, they give you a little area switcher down below. We'll see that in just a second. But also note that over here, here's my group, and then here are the different links that we can get to, to begin working with data inside there. Okay, so now that we've seen that, let's go ahead and get back here. And, let's say that if someone starts using leads and they're looking inside of leads, I might want to change the way that either this view looks, or if I drill into one of these, I might want to switch the way that this form looks. So what you'll see is that as we're using the editor, entities have forms and views behind them. So if I go to views, and I can basically say, don't allow this app to use all the views, just this one. And also we can get in and use the view designer. So down here I can go through and say, well, what do we want to show? Maybe I want to get rid of certain columns and add other columns back in. And back over here under primary attributes, what are the things that I might want to add in? So if I go back to email and click on that, and so now that we've kind of, made those changes, let's go ahead and hit save. Let's go ahead and publish. Remember, publish is always important. And so now that we've done that, let's go ahead and do a close and save. Let's go ahead and play the app. Let's go ahead and now what we should see is that if I go back to, somehow I didn't do that right, but now I've gone over to the view, and here's the kind of the view that I changed. Now, here's what's really neat about Canvas apps. I'm sorry, model-driven apps. Let's say we go back here into my environment. Here's Sales Hub. I didn't create this. This was the app that Microsoft created. So let me go ahead and run this thing. I go ahead and run it, and this is kind of what you're used to here. So this is an app that you can open up the source code for and begin editing. Note that at the very bottom here, I'm in the sales area, but I can switch that over to app settings. Okay, now let's go back. Let's take this and let's open it up in edit mode. And so if you don't like the way that the Microsoft product comes out of the box, being able to go to accounts, being able to open up the main account form and be able to change that, gets to be something that, isn't rocket science, and it's a very predictable way to be able to go in, and begin working with things inside there. Okay, so once again, as you're working with these, let's get back here. There's Sales Hub, and you can see that, some ways you can open up and make some edits. Some things are locked down inside of it. Okay, now let's go back to my slides. So, the key to model-driven apps is that you have a no-code design environment which kind of focuses on these entities, which are kind of components. They're all independent. They hold their own set of forms and views. Now, another neat thing about model-driven apps is that if I open this thing up and now, we take this and we start making it a lot smaller and we start kind of looking at this, through a mobile device, this is what we call the new unified interface, and it's highly responsive. And also, I'll kind of point out again that, for the past year when Microsoft unveiled these, if you're not using Dynamics 365, you'd say, I can't really use this because it's going to mean $40 for every user that uses my application. And so with Microsoft licensing changes, switching things from $40 down to $10 per user, now you might think that the value add of using this UI, which basically automatically adds a responsive element and allows you to target mobile devices with very little extra effort, might be worth that $10 a month, compared to working with Canvas apps, having to slug it out, screen by screen to build out your UI experience. Okay, now let's look at one more thing. Let's say that we have a lead here, and that someone takes one of these leads and opens the lead up, and you're going to see this UI experience, come across the side right here. So this is what we call a business process flow. Now, let's go back and just cover a couple more slides. So we looked at model-driven apps, and the whole idea is that you use the common data service, you define or just choose out-of-the-box entities, and then you basically just assemble it. So entities have fields, so they're like database tables. They have fields that are option sets. So if you have a pick list of 3 choices, you're going to create an option set for that. If you've come from a background of using SharePoint to model data and multiple tables of relationships, you'll find that the CDS is way ahead of it, as far as understanding relationships and adding lots of value-added aspects to the development environment, that understand relationships. For instance, if you had 2 things, students and classes as entities, and you create a many-to-many relationship, they automatically build a association table behind the scenes so you can start associating, students with classes. Okay, now with the UI components, there is the model-driven app, and there's the sitemap. The sitemap actually does not live inside the app. You could use that sitemap across multiple apps if you felt like it, but they are independently versioned. They're independently published. Okay, and then we also saw there are forms and views. One thing I should do is I'm going to go back here so I can go back, and I showed kind of one of the forms designers, but now let's say that I go back here and let's go to something like account, and as I go to account and then we go look at things like the forms and views, in just a second the forms are going to come up. And so if I open this up, this is the new forms designer right here. And so as I was working before, you kind of saw the older designer, and Microsoft is kind of moving from the older Dynamics 365 world to the newer world. But what you'll find is still there's several things that don't work in this new mode. So switching back to classic mode is sometimes necessary, in the short term. But realize that there's kind of the modern designer for views and forms and the old classic one. And I would think, definitely at least through the end of the year, we're going to still be using both of them. Okay, now I kind of jumped into model-driven apps. Into business process flows, and now we have to kind of finish up on them. So let's kind of start just by kind of looking at the user interface experience, that's brought about by a business process flow. So business process flows, are built using Flow, but a very specific flavor, which basically only works with a common data service and basically only manifests itself, as a UI experience into model-driven apps. Okay, that was a mouthful. But let's go back here to Flow. So here, if I say I want to look at flows, and I'm now going to look at business process flows. So if you created a common service database and you did install Dynamics 365, we wouldn't have many of these flows. Okay, but one of the value-added aspects of installing Dynamics 365 is not only does it add entities, but here is a business process flow, which is called lead to opportunity. So let's go ahead and open that up. As I open that up, and I didn't mean to play it, let's go ahead and edit it and kind of see what it looks like. So the idea is when you build a business process flow, you're going to add stages. If I go down here, notice that you can add a stage, and then once you add a stage, you can kind of think of it as a certain milestone, for where the data in a record is. So for instance, we have qualify lead, and we have all these data steps, that Microsoft has kind of built in. And you kind of see that if I go back here into the UI and someone comes down, to qualify, it basically is the, the actual business process flow, that leads the user through. Hey, is there already an existing contact for this lead? Yes, let's go ahead and use it. Same thing, with an account. Is there already an account that we could use? If not, keep marking things inside there. But the idea is, after you get through a certain, set of things inside here, we should be able to kind of move down the line. And so by creating, these business process flows, you basically get that kind of opportunity. And so when I have a stage, I get to specify things, such as over here, I have a condition. If this condition, is in such, go ahead and do something such as run a flow. So when we built these, we have data steps. We have workflow, which, remember, this is the older Dynamics 365 workflows that are being moved forward. And also, we have these workflows that come from Dynamics 365. The Common Data Service is relatively new. So what are they calling these workflows we've been building for the last 5 or 10 years? They call them Common CDS Classic Workflow, which to me isn't a great name because the CDS doesn't go back that far. But just know that Microsoft is trying to integrate Flow as the main workflow layer. But this problem they have is that they have this history of a workflow infrastructure in Dynamics 365, and Flow doesn't do lots of things that the old infrastructure does. And I think of all the messy changeover that we have, as we kind of take the older Dynamics and move it into the Power Platform, it will be merging the old workflow layer and the new Flow layer. And I just see that being a 2 to 3 year process before we kind of get to the end of that, just because there are things such as, in workflow and different components, you can put, you can use a synchronous mode to do validation before someone enters a piece of data. And with the Flow architecture, everything is asynchronous, so it can be scalable. Okay. But once again, I just wanted to give you an idea of what, business, process flows look like. Okay. So in addition to business process flows, which are definitely the big ticket item, there's also the older workflow layer. There are now actions that they're adding in, inside of Flow. And then there's also business rules, which are something else kind of carried forward from Dynamics 365. Okay, so now we're kind of at the end of the hour. Hopefully these demos inspired you and gave you a little bit more understanding of the architecture and kind of showed you some of the opportunities that you have working with PowerApps together. And so I want to kind of end up with just kind of a shameless plug for my company, Critical Path Training. We're a bunch of nerds that sit around and learn this stuff and write courseware. So there's one particular course which is building business solutions with PowerApps and Flow. So if you're looking for a 3-day drill down course that doesn't just have trivial labs but has you kind of work through some real world chores and kind of allows you to kind of get it under your fingertips, rather than you watching someone else do it. So with that, thank you everyone for attending today, and thanks for your interest in Critical Path Training.